My name is Ernest O'Pines, and for 42 years I sold paper goods across the lower half of Arkansas and into northern Louisiana. It was a living, and an honest one, though not the sort of trade that leaves statues behind. I knew every office manager from Hamburg to Bastrop by their first name and their preferred brightness. I could look at a ream and tell you if it would jam a copier before the copier knew it. Folks imagine sales as talk. Most of it is listening. Listening for the moment when a man admits he'd rather not have to think about paper again for the rest of his life, and you assure him you can make that dream come true. Now, at 67, I am what they call retired, a condition I find agreeable only when it is understood not as an end to labor, but as a reallocation of it. My energies, once devoted to the relative merits of 20-pound bond versus 24, are now directed toward more edifying pursuits. I record those in a weekly column for the Ashley County Eagle, titled, as you might guess, Uncle Ernest O'Pines. The word opine has lost currency. I keep it alive out of stubbornness and the belief that a county is measured, in part, by the dignity of its verbs. My present passion is ornithology, a field that rewards a certain temperament, the patient, the observant, the cheerfully underprepared. Birds are best met on their terms, in the weather they prefer, the light they choose, at the hour most other creatures, including men, regret. The bird I wanted was the red-cockaded woodpecker, a small, particular citizen of the longleaf and loblolly pines who insists on living in living timber and has suffered for the insistence. It is not the bird of postcards, but it is a bird that repays attention. The destination was the Felsenthal National Wildlife Refuge, 65,000 acres of bottomland hardwoods and upland pine stitched together by sloughs and patience. The federal government drew a line around it in 1975, but the land had been drawing lines for centuries. River bends, sand blows from old earthquakes, faint tram grades where the El Dorado and Bastrop once hauled trees towards Crossett's appetite. When men quit a place, the trees keep their own minutes. If you walk slow, you can read 'em. The plan, arrived at with a compass, a topographical sheet, and a modest argument with technology, was simple enough. I would haul my new Hyundai Pioneer 1000 behind my 2018 Tacoma TRD off-road as far as the gravel allowed, then take the side-by-side down the overgrown bed of the El Dorado and Bastrop tram line, aiming for a patch of upland pine rumored to hold a family group of red-cockadeds. I allow that rumored is not a scientific term, but I have found that good rumors are often maps with the label smudged. Some might say a man in his late 60s has no business piloting a machine into the bottoms alone. These are generally the same people who think adventure is something you can add to a shopping cart. My feeling is that a life spent in careful increments, cases, invoices, miles between clients, earns a man the right to miscalculate in the direction of wonder. Besides, this was no impulsive lark. I had a thermos of coffee strong enough to dissuade doubt, a pair of Bushnell 10x42s that hold focus better than most of my acquaintances, a silver Ranger compass that does not flatter you when you're wrong, and a pack heavy with practicalities, sandwiches and wax paper, a rolled map, a flashlight that claims to be waterproof and has not yet been asked to prove it. It began, as most serious undertakings do in Ashley County, with a map stretched across a kitchen table and a pencil tapping the spots where roads turned suggestive. I drew a thin line from the boat ramp south of Huttig, up through a web of old timber spurs, over a covert I remembered from a catfish trip in '86, and along a straight scar the satellite insisted was the tram bed. The satellite is an honest enough guide, but it leaves out the important part, what it feels like when the crown of the road disappears and the pines lean in close enough to hear your thinking. People ask why a man would go to such trouble for a bird that weighs less than an ounce. I could quote conservation doctrine or deliver a lecture on keystone species, but the truth is nearer and less noble. After 4 decades of paper, I wanted to follow a sheet back to its source, not to the mill, with its doctrine of steam and schedules, but farther upstream to the tall, straight pines where something taps 3 times and the forest answers with sap. If a paper salesman is to confess anything at the end, he ought to confess that the tree had the first word. Felsenthal, being federal, has signs. They present a confident face, boundary markers, rules about fires and dogs, encouragements to respect the fragile. I respect all that, but the refuge also has the older signage, the limbs that point where wind teaches them, the paler stripe of soil where water argues its case, the narrow, ruler-straight strip of higher ground that tells you men once ran iron here in a hurry. When the engine cuts, the woods say what the signs meant. My purpose was not a joyride. It had a graphic and educational aim, as I put it in my notebook. Graphic because I meant to bring back a photograph of Picotes borealis as proof to myself that attention still pays a dividend. And educational because a county that forgets how to read its own trees has surrendered more than shade. I had no illusions of rarity fame. The red cockaded is not the ivory bill. It has the decency to exist. But it does require a man to step off pavement and make a compact with quiet. Before daylight, I fueled the Tacoma at Pruitt's and endured the usual questions about where and why. I tried to explain about trees of a certain age and the moral improvement that comes from locating a bird precisely where a biologist once drew an arrow. The girl at the register nodded the way people nod at an uncle who is tolerated for his money and forgiven for his theories. She said, "Be careful," which was sound advice, poorly suited to my plan. Driving south, the world commits to forest in increments. Cross its stacks, draw their breath. The last street light stutters out behind you. Then the highway shoulders slacken, and the ditches become small rivers rehearsing for flood. A fog comes up from the bottoms that has its own calendar. Deer read it. So do men who remember what a slowdown looks like from a pulpwood cab. I followed the familiar asphalt till the familiar ended, then gravel till gravel thinned to 2 ruts, then ruts till even intention had to admit it was now a path. There's a moment, sitting in a parked truck at the edge of such places, when cowardness and prudence hold a brief meeting. In that meeting, they often agree to call the whole thing off. On this morning, however, the Hyundai Pioneer announced its opinion with a cheerful, slightly insolent bark, and the matter was settled. I rolled it down the trailer ramps, locked the Tacoma, and felt that peculiar lightness that happens when you leave the last key you possess inside a machine you can't see from where you're going. The plan, the gear, the route were all sound enough to satisfy a retired salesman and to fool a birder. I can't say what else I expected to find beyond the woodpecker and the quiet. I will say only that when a man goes looking for a small, exacting bird in a big and different forest, he ought to be prepared for the forest to take an interest. And if the forest is in the mood to answer, it will not be in the language you had planned to hear. So I ventured out for a reasonable cause, one I could justify to a wife, a banker, and the part of myself that keeps a ledger. I went because attention is a form of gratitude, and because some things, once scarce, can only be honored by being found. I went in with a compass, a map, a side-by-side, a thermos of coffee, and the modest hope of a photograph. It was, I told myself, a sound reason to venture out. What I had not accounted for, what no prudent introduction can admit without seeming unserious, was how quickly a sound reason becomes a story, and how a story once started in the bottoms insists on traveling farther than the map.